This video seeks to answer new questions that have come up about firmware 4.0 for the A1 Mark II and the A9 Mark III. Let's get into it. Okay, so I've got a whole bunch of questions from people and some comments that I wanted to go through because I think it's germane to what we're doing. The first thing I want to say about 4.0 regarding the A1 Mark II is it is safe to do it. You're not going to brick your camera. It's good to go. I think that the issues that some few people had with that problem was relevant to like connecting it to a computer, and now that Sony has finally figured out how to get firmware updates onto cards, it's much better now. I wouldn't worry about it. You should go for it. Basically, I'm going to go through these questions and hopefully there'll be some good answers for you in those. All right, so Flash Forum 939 says, I'm a little confused. I cannot find anything changed in my menu after updating my A1 Mark II to 4.0. I also cannot find anything in the manual when searching for real-time recognition AF Plus in different combinations. Are there any settings that can be turned on or off that can be tweaked to achieve the best result? So first thing I want to address is that this firmware update is a foundational update, meaning that it affects the entire autofocus system across the board. It basically tweaks the AI. It gives new algorithms to the AI so that it's much more accurate than it was before. There is no way to turn it on other than uploading your firmware to 4.0. Once you have 4.0, you are going to have real-time recognition AF Plus, or what I call tracking plus. So there's no way to turn it on. It's already on if you've done the update. So that's question number one. Second thing, the manual is not going to have anything about this because the manual was made when they shipped the camera to you way back when, which the year anniversary was last week for the A1 Mark II. So it's already over a year old. So the manual's not going to have a thing in it because the manual didn't imagine the firmware update that came in 4.0 or 3.2 or 3.4 or all those other ones. So very good question. Some people said to turn off subject recognition so the camera does not have to determine whether it's seeing bird versus people as an example. As an example, if I'm strictly shooting birds, then turn off subject recognition, but at bird only, what do you recommend? I think now it's actually safe to leave subject recognition on. As long as you are selecting the correct AF that you want, meaning like most of us are going to be shooting human, but a lot of people are doing birds. Just don't forget to change it when you go from one to the other. If you're going to shoot birds in flight on Monday and Tuesday, you're going to do soccer game, you're going to want to make sure you change it back to human. Dan Higgins says, firmware 4.0 looks like it improves algorithms, etc. for autofocus, and the video Sony shared makes it look like sports was a primary driver for this. Totally agree. I just updated and will be shooting some soccer tomorrow. Would love to hear your feedback once you have had a chance to check it out. I don't think it would change any of your recommendations in this video, but since I just saw your video, I haven't been doing this in the past. I'm going to implement your recommendations along with 4.0 update. And in fact, I was still on 2.0 looking for noticeable improvements. Dan, you're going to see big improvements from 2.0 to 4.0. That's like 4 cameras ago. So yeah, I think you're going to be very pleased. I really do. Thanks. I'm still using 1.01. I guess I will update in the morning. Also for sports, what about AF subject shift sensitivity? Lock on to responsive. I use 4.0. I use 4. And last, what about AF track for speed change? Stable, standard, or responsive? I shoot video about 60% or more of the time. That's a very significant comment at the end. So this is a primarily video shooter. I do not use lock on. You want to use lock on for video, not responsive. But if you're a still shooter shooting sports, you want to use responsive. AF speed track for change, probably 3 or 2. And I think I did that. So, thanks. Is there any way to lock focus without keeping the focus button pressed? I have figured it out on face, but not in animal or birds. It seems like you have to keep the focus button front or back pressed. Is that correct? Yes. In order for tracking to really be active, you have to press something and either hold or toggle. So you can set it up for toggle, and that's in the menus. So if you want to try that, you could do that. Could I ask which focus area are you using? I am using tracking, and I'm now using small. I find that small is working better for me than medium. I always used medium in the past unless it was like a 6 or a 4 with a converter. But now I'm using small for just about everything. I think with the new algorithm, it's much better for me. I get less mistakes or whatever, as long as I can get on that right action. That's the key. And then what setting for AF tracking speed for speed change? I shoot football. My settings are center, fix, 4, and responsive. I would definitely get out of center and get into tracking small for sure. But your responsive and the 4 is right. Occipital Exposure says, I updated my A1 Mark II firmware and shot a soccer game yesterday. I immediately noticed as much more sticky autofocus despite other players running in and out of the frame and crossing in front of the player I'd locked onto. It was great before, but the A1 Mark II AF is absolutely fantastic now. Before this update, I was considering adding the A1 III, but I didn't want to lose the cropping power of 50 megapixel. You, my friend, just basically did a commercial on the A1 Mark II and why it really is ultimately superior to the A9 Mark III. The A9 Mark III is a remarkable camera that's got all these possibilities technically, but at the end of the day, I don't really need more than 30 frames per second, and I'd much rather have a larger file to play with than a smaller file. So I'm with you. I totally agree. All right, page 2. Here we go. Zach asks, I did the update a few days ago and used it in a soccer game, an SEC match. Wow, I felt a definite difference in keeping track of the goalkeeper and traffic and people cutting through the chosen person. Yeah, I'm with you, man. It's so much better than it was. In fact, I would go so far as to say that I think the A1 Mark II is now equal to the A9 III in terms of autofocus tracking. So that's really something to say. But I think they finally caught the camera up to the A9 III. Occipital Exposure. I updated my A1 Mark II firmware and shot a soccer game yesterday. I immediately noticed a much more sticky AF. Andy Oliver says, thanks for the video. I just updated the firmware on my A9 III and A1 Mark II. I found the A1II did struggle with focus for football at times compared to the A9 III or Z9. Yeah, I kind of agree. I think you're going to see a big improvement. Let me know in the comments below how that goes for you. This video is really useful to see, PMR. Thank you. I now have A1 Mark II, largely thanks to yourself. Unfortunately, I missed out on the 4.0 update as I was away covering the USA Ultimate Club Nationals. I don't think there's any sports photography influencer, creator, let alone a Sony shooter, giving as much authentic advice and commentary from a real life and on-location perspective as yourself. Dude, thank you, because I get a fair amount of hate in some of these messages from people. And every time I hit one like this, it makes me feel really good. And you know, Sony doesn't pay me to do these videos. This is all out of the goodness of my heart. And I do make a little bit of AdSense money from YouTube, but it's not much. So thank you very much for your comments. I really appreciate that. Sony, please let me shoot in lossless compressed at 20 frames per second, and then use the boost button to immediately switch into compressed raw 30 frames per second. Otherwise, the boost function is not technically useless, but for all practical intents and purposes, it's really kind of useless. It's not anything I've ever thought about because I don't shoot raw, ever. But those of you that do, maybe that would be useful. And seems like the button, I don't know, there's a lot of possibilities with all these different custom function buttons and menus. So maybe that's something that Sony could do in the future. I think they could if they wanted to. Matt Baucock says, I had a similar experience. I updated my A9 III and A1 Mark II on Friday. I shot football on Saturday. Focusing on players crossing behind another person was no issue. Prior to the update, I would have lost focus after they were blocked. Definitely improvement on both bodies. Yeah, I think there's less improvement on the A9 III because I really think that is just a bitchin' camera anyway. Out of box when it came out, it was really fantastic. But the A1 Mark II certainly has benefited from 4.0 for sure. I agree with that, Matt. All right, page 3. Philip Johnson says, thanks for the video. I'm using the Creators app, which works great for me for updating firmware and changing clock time for the cameras. I've never done this, and thank you, Philip, for pointing that out. I know I've heard about it for doing the clock time for sure, but I just didn't know that you could do the firmware updates. Now that's on me because I'm supposed to be the expert at stuff, and I'm not in everything. So thank you for the suggestion. I immediately noticed a difference with my Samyang 135 and A9 Mark III. It hunted less and locked on the eye better. Haven't tried it yet with my 300 GM. This brings up a very important point. Many of you are using third market, aftermarket lenses, and all these firmware updates are going to benefit you for sure. If you're using Sony glass, the benefits may not be as noticeable because they're so good to start with. But when you backwards engineer autofocus, which is what Samyang and Broken On and all these other people do, all these updates are really, really important. But also make sure that you keep up with the firmware updates for the aftermarket lenses. Don't just do the camera and figure you're done. You really want to keep up with those updates for sure on into the future. All right, Dan O Photography says, do you know if function 4 applies to wildlife and birds? Yes, as I said before, this is a holistic and foundational improvement of AI algorithms across the board in terms of autofocus for the A9 III and the A1 Mark II. Yes. Brian Small says, so maybe a dumb question, but should we assume you are using one of the tracking AF modes for all these images? He's referencing my first video I did on Tracking Plus. Yes, I use tracking for everything. Everything. I mean, I even use it for macro photography on a tripod. So it just works so well. Why would I use anything else? So yeah, it's not a dumb question, by the way. Camera Gear Geek asks, does Tracking Plus also work for video? Yeah, again, it's a foundational increase of the algorithm. It's a much better algorithm than we had originally. It's going to work much better for video as well. Yes. Okay, Hiker Trash Films. This is a long one, so bear with me. You can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. A1 Mark II is a joke of a camera. Still can't match A7C with animal bird eye AF in video, which Sony never gave A1 either. The Bion's XR processor is a flaming turd, and an iPhone from 2019 can run circles around it. No CFA Gen 4 write speeds to double the buffer, a CPU that's severely underpowered for the A1 sensor, and they sell you a $7,000 firmware upgrade. I have been a Sony professional for half a decade, and I refuse to give these people any more money until the A1 Mark II debuts with a new CPU and CFA Gen 4 write speeds. I don't need a global shutter and the terrible IQ image quality for landscapes. Sony will probably ruin the next A1 by putting a global shutter in it and destroying the advantage the A1 commands for travel and landscape. The 28-70 is garbage, and people wanted a 24-55 f2. 50 to 150 GM is a boat anchor and feels terrible in the hand when compared to a 50 1.2 GM or a 135 GM. Everything since the 300 GM from Sony has been a joke. A9 III is an outlier for sports and action photographers, but I detest the dynamic range and image quality of a global shutter for landscapes and architecture where you want ISO 100 and full dynamic range. You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. Thanks for watching.